Number two of being an effective magician. Are you willing to be witnessed in your vulnerability? You know, being an effective magician is about integrity. It's about being who you really are. It's about being really authentic to yourself, to your infinite self, to your divine self. And that means being honest. And, people who are not effective magicians aren't willing to be witnessed in their vulnerability. They're only willing to be seen in a certain way, as a certain person, as a certain identity, and they're very defensive around their identities. They're like, oh, I only want this certain identity. My cat class is joining me here. They're like, I only want this certain identity. I only want to be seen in this specific way. And, I don't want to be seen as magical. I just want to be seen as normal. I only want to be accepted in this certain way, and these identities are not authentic to us as magicians, and when you're playing as your non-authentic self, when you're only letting people see your masks, you're not letting people really see and feel and hear you. And people know that. I really think everyone can really feel, like, even if they don't say it out loud, people rarely say it out loud, but I really feel like people know when we're not being our authentic selves. I really feel that everyone can feel when they're not feeling our deepest internal selves. And so a really key quality as a magician is being really willing to be felt as our most authentic, vulnerable selves. And, I find that there's actually deep confidence in this. When we're willing to be felt in our most vulnerable selves, that's when we build confidence, because we're like, oh, I've been felt in my most vulnerable self. That means that I can be seen, heard, accepted, and understood. That means I can enjoy life from my most vulnerable self, from my most authentic self. And we really gain confidence. And with confidence, we're able to take more action. My cat Klaus is still here. He's just like right here on my lap now. So this isn't for everybody, by the way. Made me know, like, people who we don't want to necessarily express this deep vulnerability at first with people who can't hold us there, like people who aren't in approval. This is really for being those kinds of spaces where there is a lot of deep approval and there is a lot of deep love. So this is more with like really specific friends who are capable of holding you and seeing you in deep approval. And it's for, coaching spaces and coaching containers with coaches that you really feel like are capable of holding you in approval. And so, yeah, it's not to do with everybody. Like, I wouldn't necessarily go up to a stranger on the street or, honestly go to my parents or to people who, don't necessarily have a background in this kind of work and be like, hey, do you want to hear my most vulnerable self right now? I mean, they're probably honestly not very interested and also wouldn't know how to respond and even might respond negatively because a lot of people feel unsafe around vulnerability. Whereas when you are people who do feel safe around vulnerability, who you do feel like are really going to see you and hold you in approval, then letting yourself be vulnerable, letting yourself say the most difficult thing and the deepest thing, it can be such a relief, such a release. It's such freedom. And even if, again, I'm not, saying that you have to like go spouting your vulnerability everywhere. I mean, that's another thing. And I don't think that doesn't necessarily feel good. And that's not necessarily an integrity. But, in those spaces of deep approval, allowing yourself to be your most vulnerable self, allowing yourself to deeply express what you're seeing and hearing and feeling in that moment, and really allowing that inner self to be externalized is very, very powerful and helps you to be in more integrity overall. It helps you to really know yourself, to see yourself externalized and approved of and reflected back to you by others who understand. And it helps you to be so much more present and so much aware. It's like you become more present and your power becomes more present. And when you become more present and your power becomes more present, then you have so much more that's available to you Like it's almost like your self becomes a greater resource to you, and you have so much more to give to the world. And you know who you are, and you know that you can come from your deepest inner self. And even if you're not speaking about that vulnerable self, like you're probably not going to like put that most vulnerable self into marketing or into a job interview, for instance, you're still coming from that sense of confidence, from that sense of integrity, and from that sense of inner power. And people can sense that about you. They can feel you more. They can feel your wholeness and feel your power and feel your confidence, feel your integrity. And then people respond a lot more positively to you. And that is also how to be an effective magician. So I encourage you to find people that you feel really safe with, that you feel like really approve of you, that you feel like there's a lot of love with. And if it feels good to you, you know, trusting your own sovereign self, allowing yourself to experience that risk of vulnerability. Again, like I said before, moving out of the comfort zone into the stretch zone. And we don't need to go into the danger zone. We don't need to necessarily reveal everything or reveal things we're not ready to reveal, but letting ourselves, when we're ready, move into that stretch zone and be a little more vulnerable than we've been before. And that is just so incredibly powerful and such an incredible form of integration. It's actually like such a great self development step to do that with another person and to let yourself be really seen, heard, and approved of. So yes, choosing authentic next step vulnerability, letting yourself be a little uncomfortable with your own vulnerability can lead to enormous self-growth. And again, help you be an effective magician.